Well, welcome to the panel number 3, the first one of the afternoon, entitled Future Nuclear Technologies. As the board says, I'm Paul Jagger from Babcock International, and in fact, more specifically, Babcock Naval Nuclear. So what does that mean? It says I'm Director of Mission Systems. Babcock Naval Nuclear is charged with providing engineering support to the Navy's submarine fleet from Devonport and Faslane, predominantly the waterfronts. And my job is to provide engineering support to the weapon systems of the submarines. I've got teams who do that. We don't do it alone. We do it with industry partners. Some are in this room today. So that's where we sit, if you like, in the grand scheme of things. Babcock's been involved with PONI for 8 years, to my knowledge. We really enjoy the opportunity to get away from the waterfront, away from the direct engineering, and introduce our early career professionals to the broader context. Every year I've done it, I've introduced new people, and they've always enjoyed it. The early career professionals that go out on the various visits, the bilaterals, all come back enthused. So it's a real credit to PONI, and we're very supportive of this. Myself, I've had a career in the Royal Navy, in deterrent submarines, in the MOD, in policy and acquisition. So I've been in the deterrent program since '94, essentially, in various roles, and the last 10 years with Babcock. So it's really great to continue that. Now, this afternoon, we've got a really interesting couple of presentations. I've got a couple of slight changes to the program to announce. So unfortunately, Dr. Aileen Matley is not available, so we're down to 2 presentations. And I've been asked by Rusi to mention the panel now ends at 15:30, and the coffee break will end at 15:45. Okay, so that's sort of the domestics. The one thing I really like about PONI is the way the nuclear domain really stretches. It can talk about disarmament, deterrence policy, and then we go right across to cyber, to space, to energy. And we've had some interesting talks this morning, which have been a bit of a preview for what you're going to get now. But also, the nuclear domain in the UK looks at new technologies as to whether they're a threat to the business, whether we can exploit them, and how we adapt to them. So today, there's 2 particular presentations now that you're going to see on how do we adapt the knowledge we've got with the nuclear energy, nuclear physics, how do we adapt that for the future? So the first one is going to look at nuclear waste, and the second one is going to look at alternative, unconventional applications. And so I think you're going to be educated and entertained by both of them. So without any further ado then, I'd like to ask Alex Langton and Kate Taylor. Alex is from AWE, and Kate is from National Nuclear Laboratory. And they're going to present on nuclear waste. Over to you.
You've stolen my opening. So welcome to our talk, Nuclear Waste, a burden or a fuel for the future. So as colleagues at AWE and NNL, we've created this presentation together, but usual disclaimer, these are our own views and not those of our organisations. Okay, so the UK has many nuclear licence sites, and with the government's new commitment to make 8 new financial investment decisions over the next decade, potentially many more. So there's real opportunity to think about our whole fuel cycle as and when we approach these new builds. So an introduction to the fuel cycle, because I know most of you guys are defence rather than civil. You start with mining your uranium, and then you various processes to convert it into fuel, and you irradiate it in the reactor, and that produces electricity. Now, the open fuel cycle, this is where the spent fuel, once it comes out the reactor, you treat it, you process it, and you eventually will store it underground. But for the closed fuel cycle, you can actually take some of those waste products from the spent fuel and reprocess them and feed them back in for a new fuel production. So just it's a bit sticky button. So we'll look at those kind of repurposing technologies. So I mentioned already some of the stuff, there's limited amount of repurposing you can do. That's when we look at things like safe and secure disposal in the geological disposal facility. But for some of our wastes, you can separate out that spent fuel into different waste streams. So you can separate out your uranium and plutonium and your fission products and your minor actinides from each other, and you can address each of those accordingly. And you can so the uranium and plutonium you can then reuse to create MOX fuel and then power a new power plant. Or you can even include minor actinides as well as plutonium and uranium if you're going to use a burner reactor where you can consume waste at the same time that you're generating electricity. But first, what's the benefit of separating out all of these waste types? Why not just treat them as one big lump? Well, here we've got a graph of radiotoxicity as a function of time. So this yellow horizontal line, this is kind of the radiotoxicity of like natural uranium ore. So you can think of this yellow line as sort of getting back to nature. The blue line shows the radiotoxicity of plutonium after time, and you can see that that takes on the order of hundreds of thousands of years before you're reaching that sort of natural level. The green, that shows minor actinides, so that's things like americium, curium. There you're talking tens of thousands, so still quite long-lived. But if you look at the brown line, that's your fission products. And those, you're talking less than 1,000 years before they're quite dramatically below the natural level of radiotoxicity. And we know we can build things that last for 1,000 years. We still have the Colosseum. We still have the pyramids. So we've got great confidence that if we build our geological disposal facility, those things can be safely secured and not live out of living memory. So we've separated out the plutonium and the minor actinides. The question is then, can we do something else with them? And this is where we turn to the idea of the circular economy. So the basic idea of a circular economy is that you design your economy, you design your process so that your waste products, rather than going into landfill or waste disposal, they are reintroduced back into your production cycle to create useful products. And this way you minimize the amount of natural resources that you're having to take out of the ground to keep that production cycle going. If we look at this in terms of the nuclear fuel cycle, you've got your natural resource, your uranium that you mine, and then at the bottom it's spent fuel. And that plutonium and the uranium you can feed back in to produce MOX fuel, like I said earlier. The minor actinides you can feed back into fuel fabrication for burner reactors, or there are also some alternative applications for the minor actinides that NNL is currently exploring. You can ask me about that later. And I just got a little graph up in the top corner as well to demonstrate, when we talk about nuclear waste, it's not always clear what we're actually talking about, but 80% of it is uranium, and the 12% up there in the orange is oxygen because it's uranium oxide. So really, there's a lot of potential for a significant amount of the waste, by weight this is, to be reused rather than be used once and go into storage. And with that, I will pass on to Alex to talk about sustainability. There we go.
Thanks, Kate. So, as we've just hopefully demonstrated, there's a clear synergy between the closed nuclear fuel cycle and the concept of a circular economy. Proactive resource management being applied to it means that we can potentially reduce the input material into the fuel cycle and reduce the quantity of waste produced. So the mining operations, as shown by the picture behind me of a open cast mine, quite environmentally damaging. So as we're going into a future where we're trying to improve sustainability and reduce our environmental impact, this is potentially something that is very worthwhile. Added point that climate change right now is caused by increased human activity, so anything that we can do to reduce that is a big win. But the reason that, a lot of the political push against the closed fuel cycle tends to be about proliferation risk, and there is one when it comes to actively processing the nuclear waste. However, this doesn't take into the picture of newer technologies that basically put in more proliferation barriers, making it more difficult to separate the plutonium from the rest of the waste. Also, when it comes to reprocessing, you're actively separating it into certain waste groups, which means you can have more targeted waste strategies for each, such as Kate says, putting the minor actinides back in the reactor, or encapsulating it in glass. So when it comes to the open fuel cycle, you wrap it in concrete, which is more bulky and harder to store in the geological disposal facility. But if we can put it in glass, you can put it more compactly, but it's also more stable. So that's something that's potentially better for future generations to deal with. So what this really means is that there's a trade-off between the short term, where there's an increased proliferation risk due to increased nuclear material movement, and a potential reduction in the long term as we get it into a more stable state and there's lesser quantities of it. There we go. So it then comes down to the cost. Well, for both the open and fuel cycle, I'll happily say the reactor build is the bulk of the cost, which is already the political discussion that was this morning's presentation. So if we were to consider the open fuel cycle as the baseline, about 100% cost, if we were to upgrade that to a closed fuel cycle, we're basically looking at an 8% increase, which is relatively small compared to all the sustainability benefits we've just talked about. So then the economic shifts to the security of supply, and I think this is quite a relevant discussion point right now. So this is a map of the global distribution of uranium reserves. I emphasize reserves, it's a limited quantity. And the big suppliers are Australia and Kazakhstan. But if you look at Europe, and specifically the UK, we do not have any uranium reserves. So we're completely reliant on foreign imports of uranium to make our nuclear fuel. We do make nuclear fuel in the UK. So as was said in the morning presentation, yes, we can rely on our allies, but if we're looking at trying to build resilience into an energy system, especially on supply chains, then if we can turn our waste into nuclear fuel, then you've built in resilience, which is, I believe, is the goal we're trying to achieve right now. So what's next? Well, the UK government is trying to develop that low-carbon energy transition, and this is going to be a combination of nuclear, solar, wind, and battery storage. But what we're trying to say here is that when they start this discussion, they should be considering the nuclear waste policy at the same time, reopening the discussion and actually thinking of a holistic through-life policy that takes in the proactive resource management to say, instead of just putting it into the ground and leaving it, let's do something with it. And this needs to be done at a governmental level. You can't leave it to the local suppliers to deal with. This is bigger than one individual energy company. But it needs to include those energy companies in the discussion because it's their reactor designs and more importantly, it's their choice of fuel that is going to be the crux of this discussion. So as we go to a low-carbon future and transition to hopefully a more sustainable economy, we should be asking ourselves now, what is the cost of not doing anything, and specifically, what's the cost on future generations for not recycling our waste? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex and Kate. The next presentation is off-planet, I think is the best way to describe it. And we have Josh Mulholland and Rhiannon McGrady. Josh is from the Ministry of Defence and Rhea is from MASS. And over to you.
Hi there. So as we've been introduced, I'm Rhea and this is Josh. We also have a colleague, Elliot, who's out in the audience who will help us with Q&A afterwards. So today we're going to discuss unconventional uses for non-conventional weapons. So disclaimer, as the same as everyone else, modern MASS do not condone detonation of any of nuclear weapons in space. Obviously goes against the treaty also. So our main theme today is the application of nuclear technology in space without using them as weapons. So this is for humankind and how it can benefit us as a whole. So today we're looking at planetary defense, nuclear pulse propulsion, and nuclear terraforming. Also to note that looking at any options would currently violate the treaty that is in place. And also to note, we do this in our own time, looking at these future technologies, and it's not something that we do ourselves. So, what if we wanted to defend our world?
An excellent question. So, what would we be likely defending our world against? And the obvious answer to that is asteroids. There are a lot of them in space. They vary quite a lot in composition and size. You can get small ones on the meter scale all the way up to 1 kilometers across. And we're constantly finding new ones, but the issue is, as big as some of these asteroids are, space is really, really big, and it's really hard to find them. Some of them aren't even discovered until they've crossed between the Earth and the Moon. That's the kind of lead time we're looking at sometimes. I put a little graphic there which shows the impact of a 140-meter diameter asteroid landing in the center of London. And there'll be a little orange circle in the middle you might be able to see, which is 2 kilometers, and that is just a crater that's left. And you will see buildings destroyed out to the green circle, sort of Wimbledon, Wembley, and some fatalities all the way beyond the M25. So that's for a 140-meter asteroid. For a bit of context, a 20-meter asteroid is about the same energy output as the Hiroshima bomb, And a kilometre asteroid, of which there are almost 900 being tracked by NASA, is a extinction level event. So the threat is there, and what can we do about them? The main method of use by NASA at the moment is the kinetic impactor, or the DART method. That involves flying a spacecraft to the asteroid and just hitting it, inputting kinetic energy and diverting it off course. And over a long enough lead time, a slight angular deviation will lead to a massive miss distance, but it requires a long time to find the asteroid, to get the spacecraft to the asteroid, and for the divert to be enough that it misses us. So the question is, how can we use the high energy output of nuclear detonation and exploit that to provide extra layers of defense? Nuclear pump lasers were first theorized as part of the Star Wars project during the Cold War, whereby you harness the energy output of a nuclear detonation, focus it through a series of beams, and heat one side of a celestial body. Back in those days, it was missiles they were looking at, but it can also work for comets, which have a large water content, and if you can vaporize that, you can create a new plume which will send it off course. There's also ways of using the explosion directly by either detonating maybe a smaller yield device on the side to divert it, like the DART, but with a larger energy input, so it can be done a bit later, or possibly by actually putting a megaton yield device inside a large asteroid to completely obliterate it. And if you want more information on that, I would recommend the sci-fi film Armageddon. But once you've looked at how we can defend our world, why stop there? Why not explore and see what else is out there?
So what if we could explore strange new worlds and make Star Trek a reality? First of all, we need to look at what we currently have and the designs. And currently there are two. So we have a low thrust ion design, and we also have the large fuel loads that we currently see in the chemical rockets that go up into space. There are also human limitations of going into space. So you have the cosmic radiation. The longer you're in space, the more irradiated you become. You also have the long-term effects of low gravity and decreasing your bone density. You also have the psychological effects of being stuck in a spaceship without your local daily stuff that you might have day to day, friends and family, and having a chat with people. So, in the past, this has been looked into using Project Orion, which was created or looked into the late 50s, early 60s. This has been looking at the fission devices, and what would happen in Orion is you'd have a series of detonations behind a push plate. As they go off, they push the push plate and propel the spaceship forwards. Now, because of this and because of the treaty that we have in place, Project Apollo had higher priority, and this was put on to a back burner. So what can we do in future? What ideas are currently out there for us to look into? So using nuclear detonation, we're looking at more energy efficiency and density. We're able to travel faster using nuclear detonations, and with using those, we can mitigate against the human factors as well. So there are a couple of ideas and concepts out there to use fission, fusion, and some others as well. So fission detonation is around a push-pull. So again, that detonation comes out the back and pushes the spaceship forwards. We also have the fusion, which again is detonation, and it has that push-pull concept once more. We also have magnetic confinement. Now, magnetic confinement is where you can heat a plasma using a magnetic field, as you'd see in Spider-Man 2. You also then have a very similar idea, which is around inertial confinement. It's the same as the magnetic, but using lasers instead. Any future ideas would be very similar to the inertial confinement, but the only issue with that is that we need to look in reducing the space that's needed. So currently we can do this on Earth. There's plenty of space. It's too big to put onto a spaceship. So we need to look at that efficiency and be able to reduce that in size. So once we've been able to defend our Earth and we've been able to explore these strange new planets, what can we do with these planets that would benefit us?
Yeah. So once you discover these worlds, how can we change them? So this is all about planetary terraforming. The definition of terraforming is there on the screen. It's changing a planet to make it more habitable. And the idea of using nuclear destinations to change the landscape of a planet is not a new one. The US had I think Project Plowshare might have been mentioned earlier. It's a peaceful use of nuclear weapons to create harbors, canals, move terrain around. And the image on the screen is of Project Carrier, which was a theoretical example of using 23 hydrogen bombs to create a ridge in the Bristol Mountains in California so they could put down a railroad line. Obviously, this is all theoretical. There are many reasons why it didn't happen. But there's also other theoretical ideas of it happening outside of the confines of Earth as well. So Project A119 was an alternative option to the space race, whereby, okay, we can demonstrate our rocketry capability of we can get rockets to the moon. Why not also demonstrate nuclear weapon capabilities? It has the benefits of more of a show of force, more of a deterrent posture, and also it was a lot harder to deny the moon landing. You can see a visual flash of light, and there's a new crater there. But they decided to go for the Apollo program instead, which was better public image, and I think it worked out quite well. I think we're all happy with that. But going forward, how can we use that same kind of idea of theoretically changing a planet using nuclear technologies? And there are lots of different effects. There's the physical effects that we've talked about, such as just moving land to create artificial constructs. There's also thermal effects. Detonating a nuclear weapon releases a lot of energy that can be used to heat. And also, depending on the terrain type, if you bring up dust and soil and into the atmosphere and shadow the planet, you can create a nuclear winter-style thing, which can help cool a planet down. And there are also environmental effects. You might remember Elon Musk recently talked about detonating nuclear weapons over the ice caps on Mars to try and get liquid water on there. And also, by doing that quite quickly, you could also release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which would create a one-way greenhouse effect. All of these could, in theory, be valid uses of nuclear weapons to change planets. But the main issue, one of the many issues, is that they require incredibly long lead times. You need a lot of detonations for this to occur. And once this occurs, it takes many hundreds of generations before the planet actually becomes habitable. So it's definitely a long-term prospect. And that's kind of where we got to so far in our research. It's a bit... The main thing is there has been historical precedent for looking at every area. There are reasons why perhaps it didn't come off. There are concerns about launching nuclear material into space. There are concerns about the Test Ban Treaty and most of things. But there are also some benefits to humankind. We're not saying that, this is the be-all and end-all and we should be doing this, but any research in this area could be useful. Any research in the nuclear pulse propulsion that comes up with a better way of initiating fusion reactors will also be beneficial for energy generation on Earth as well. So I think there needs to be some consideration in the nuclear policy of how can we go about thinking about nuclear weapons, nuclear detonations outside of the Earth in a non-weaponized state, and how can this be allowed? Should it be allowed? What kind of circumstances can we think more about it? Thank you for listening, and there's just one more final nuclear pun on there as well. Thank you.